The Nintendo Switch has officially been out for one full calendar year, and what a year it's been! Not only by selling twice as fast as your ass, but by churning quality content out on a regular basis. And according to a Circuit City employee by the name of Randy Horton, Nintendo's little hybrid that could had the best first year out of any console in history. But is that really the case? Or are people selling the first years of other consoles shorter than my uncle's peck? My name's Cameron, and if you stay tuned, I'll tell you, jabroni. So if we're trying to figure out what console had the best first year ever, there's really only two ways to go about it: sales numbers and the quality of games. At the time of this video, we only know what the Switch's sales are up until the end of 2017, and the Switch sold more consoles in its first 10 months than the PS2 did in its first year, at least in Japan. The Station for Playing didn't get an international release outside of Japan until many months later, but the Switch would have had to have squeezed out another 5 million consoles out in the past 2 months to officially top the Wii. And I probably shouldn't say this, but my anonymous source and president of Nintendo, who only wishes to be identified as T. Kimishima, whom I may or may not have a friends with benefits type of arrangement with, told me that the Switch didn't quite top the Wii's first year sales, but it came really, really close. Just don't tell anybody I said that. However, regardless if the number's 15 million or 20 million, all we need to know is that the Switch sold well, and it's obviously going to continue to do so. And who cares if it tops the sales of the Wii or the Atari Jaguar?
Who cares? Who cares? I don't care.
So let's let the bigwigs at Nintendo worry about that and instead talk about the Switch's first year games as far as quality goes. After all, if I wanted a bunch of numbers, I'd play that shitty-ass computer game from the 2nd grade. Before I carry on any further, though, the idea of what console had the best first year games is subjective, and what I'm gonna talk about's only my opinion. So I encourage that all you sexy beasts watching comment your thoughts below. But anyway, with the exception of Word Muncher, the Switch got pretty much every other game imaginable within its first year. Nintendo pretty much went up to all the nice, clean, unsuspecting Switch owners, dropped their pants, and then turned around, squatted over our consoles, maybe pulled their butt cheeks apart with their hands, and then laid a chocolate fudge dragon of great gaming content for all the world to see.
Oh, you think that's funny, huh? Yeah, that's real funny.
And even if you're not considering ports, the Switch had games like Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, Xenoblade 2, and Breath of the Wild, which technically is a port. However, it's one that literally nobody played until the Switch came out anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and count it. I'm not gonna list every Switch game that's come out so far, but you get the gist of it. The Switch ripped a lot of ass in its first year, and those games are a pretty good foundation to start with. But what console should we start the comparisons with? I mean, I'm not gonna run down every console that's ever existed, cause I'm not a ninny or anything like that. I'm sure I'm gonna get shit on in the comments for overlooking some certain favorites. But again, this is only my opinion, and as far as I'm concerned, there's only 3 other consoles that come close to having a better first year than the Switch. Well, actually only 2, but I feel like the PS2 needs to be mentioned because of the success it saw in its first calendar year. As great as that thingy was, most of its notable games didn't come out till after the 1-year mark. Sorry for the slight diss if you're a fan of SSX, Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore, or Baby's Day Out the game, but don't shove anything up my rump. I'm not saying the PS2 had a bad first year, it's just that compared to the exclusives I mentioned earlier for the Switch, the PS2 really can't hold a candle. There were a lot of really good games that came out just an ass hair after the 1-year mark, like GTA 3 and Metal Gear Solid 2, but I'm already including the games that were released in Japan before the PS2 even came out in North America, so my conscience is clear. But if you're talking about which console had the best first year games, the Dreamcast really has to be in the conversation. For some reason, the hardware sales don't suggest this, but the Dreamcast had an amazing first year, at least by North American release dates anyway. There were sports games that were cool if you're into that sort of thing, I guess.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
And then there's games like Sonic Adventure, Shenmue, Crazy Taxi, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Power Stones 1 and 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Street Fighter 3, Soul Calibur, and Cum, plus many others. It kinda sucks that the Dreamcast didn't end up surviving with this kind of lineup. I guess Sega pulled too many Wii U's in a row that people just didn't trust them anymore. And the PS2 being right around the corner at the time the Dreamcast came out probably didn't help either. As far as the game quality goes though, the Dreamcast puts up a tough fight against the Switch, so the winner really is subjective, but if you ask me, I'd go with the Switch. Not because I'm a Nintendo fan man though. I was really high on the Dreamcast when it first came out, despite being one of the people that was burned by the Saturn. The reason I'm personally gonna go with the Switch though is because most of the classics that the Dreamcast offered in its first year were fighting games. And even though they're some of the greatest fighting games ever made, especially Seaman, the Dreamcast just had a little less variety than the Switch. And not only that, but some of the Dreamcast games I mentioned don't completely hold up in 2018. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them do, but due to the fact that the Dreamcast came out in a time where everyone was trying to build the 3D gaming we know today, it's only natural that the growing pains were going to hinder its game's longevity. Sonic Adventure was great when it came out, but have you tried playing it lately without the nostalgia butt plugs in? If you have, you'd realize that it really doesn't hold up that well in 2018. I'm sorry, I'd just rather play Sonic Mania. And this might get me even more heat, but I think Sonic Forces is better too. Feel free to light my ass up in the comments for that if you must. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather play Sonic Adventure for nostalgic purposes, but I do think Sonic Forces is the better game. If Sonic Forces were released in 1999, I think most people would have been more impressed by that than Sonic Adventure. And if 3D Sonic somehow never became a thing and you tried releasing Sonic Adventure now, a few people would probably try to drop a flaming bag of poo off at Sega's doorstep. But I will agree that Sonic Adventure was better in '99 than Sonic Forces is now. So if you must, then slay any of my fathers where they stand, but please don't hurt me. I know it's kinda cheating to include either of 2018 Sonic games in the argument for the Switch since they're not exclusives. But this isn't about exclusives. It's about which console's first year is flat out more fun. And even if it was based on exclusives, then I'd still prefer the Switch just based on the fact that the games are more polished for 2018 standards. The Dreamcast may have had a better first year for its time, but the Switch's games are fairly innovative at a time where it's much harder to come up with new ideas. The Dreamcast games I mentioned certainly hold up in 2018, especially the fighting games, but I think in 100 years most people would prefer Mario Odyssey and Senran Kagura Shinobi Reffle over Sonic Adventure and Seaman. Not to mention the ports and indie games the Switch has just to sweeten the pot even more. But if we're gonna consider ports and re-releases, then the Wii's gonna be harder to beat than My Neighbor Terry when you take his Vern Troyer sex tape away from him. And by the end of the Wii's first year, there were a lot of amazing games available that will always hold up, in addition to a lot of splendid original games. Most people tend to be dicks when remembering the Wii. Sure, it had more trash than gold, but the gold it had was delicious. The Wii's first year had games like Twilight Princess, Mario Galaxy, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, Metroid Prime 3, Super Paper Mario, and Eminem's Kart Racing. Plus it had games from the underrated on-rail shooter genre with Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and Sin and Punishment, which really give the Wii a hell of a lot of variety, and I don't know why we don't have any on-rail shooters for the Switch. So as far as exclusives go, I think the Wii tops the Switch hands down. But if you include ports and multiplats, then things get a little tricky. The Wii had a really good version of Resident Evil 4, but beyond that, not much else in terms of retail, while the Switch had definitive versions of half the Wii U library, plus much more like Doom, L.A. Noire, and Skyrim. The Switch also has outstanding indie support and an assload of Neo Geo games as well. But for some reason, we still don't have the Virtual Console, which the Wii had since day one, with some of Nintendo's best games ever made being re-released in its first year. I honestly think whatever the Virtual Console ends up being on the Switch is going to be superior since we had to wait so long, but it's not going to help in the argument against the Wii right now. Games like Super Metroid, Mario's 1 through 3, Super Mario World, A Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Countries 1 and 2, Sonic 3, Paper Mario, and so many others are timeless and are gonna hold up forever. And even some of the Virtual Console games from the Wii's first year that show a little age are still great today, like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. But then again, the indie support on the Switch is pretty cool too. And a lot of these games build upon what made games from the past so delightful. And in many cases, indie games actually surpass the classics that inspired them. But still though, I can't honestly say that they compare to the best of the Genesis, TurboGrafx 16, NES, Super Nintendo, and 64 games that the Wii had available within its first year. And even if you take the Switch's various ports into consideration, I'd still prefer to play the Wii's first year games over the Switch's if I were to be locked in an underground bomb shelter for the rest of my life and had to choose between the two. But again, this is all really just my opinion, and I wouldn't hold it against anybody for choosing the Switch since it's portable and region-free. It definitely shows a more promising future than what became of the Wii after its initial boom ended. There really isn't anything that could be learned from the success of the Switch's first year. It should have been obvious that having good games will sell consoles as long as it's not the Dreamcast. And having hardware that stands out, aka a gimmick, doesn't hurt either. The Switch's flood of amazing games slowed down a tad for the first half of 2018, but I'm still not even finished with last year's games, so I'm not really in a hurry for any more right now, and I'm certain that the second half of the year will be comparable and might even top 2017. What console do you think had the best first year games, though? Is there one you feel like I should have talked about but didn't? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, I'll pin whatever I find most entertaining. Consider supporting us on Patreon, don't forget to like and share this video to help this channel grow, and if you're an ultra sexy beast who's too cool for school, then subscribe if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.